Bhopal Gas Disaster. The Bhopal Gas Disaster occurred on the night of December 2nd to 3rd, 1984, at a pesticide plant operated by Union Carbide India Limited in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, India. The facility manufactured carbaryl using methyl isocyanate, MIC, a highly toxic and volatile chemical. At the time of the incident, approximately 40 metric tons of MIC were stored in Tank 610, well above recommended safety limits. Shortly after midnight, water entered the tank, triggering an uncontrolled exothermic reaction that raised internal temperatures above 200 degrees Celsius and sharply increased pressure. At approximately 12:40 a.m., a relief valve opened, releasing a dense cloud of toxic gas into the surrounding atmosphere. Due to low wind speed and nighttime conditions, the gas spread rapidly over nearby residential areas where hundreds of thousands of people lived. Official government figures reported around 3,000 immediate deaths, while later studies estimate that 7,000 to 10,000 people died within days, with 15,000 to 25,000 deaths attributed to long-term exposure. More than 500,000 people were exposed. Investigations found that critical safety systems, including refrigeration units, gas scrubbers, and flare towers, were shut down or non-functional to reduce costs. Survivors suffered chronic respiratory disease, vision loss, neurological disorders, and increased birth defects. In 1989, Union Carbide agreed to a $470 million settlement, which remains controversial. The disaster fundamentally reshaped global discussions on industrial safety, corporate responsibility, and environmental justice. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster. The Chernobyl disaster occurred on April 26, 1986, at reactor number 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near Pripyat in the Ukrainian SSR. During a late-night safety test, operators disabled multiple automatic shutdown systems to observe turbine behavior during a simulated power loss. Due to a flawed RBMK reactor design and operator error, power output became unstable. At 1:23 a.m., a sudden power surge caused a steam explosion, followed by a second explosion that destroyed the reactor core. Large quantities of radioactive material, including iodine-131 and cesium-137, were released into the atmosphere. The reactor burned for nearly 10 days, spreading contamination across Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and parts of Europe. Approximately 116,000 people were evacuated in 1986, with another 230,000 relocated later. 28 plant workers and firefighters died from acute radiation sickness within weeks, while long-term death estimates range from 4,000 to over 90,000, depending on methodology. A 30-kilometer exclusion zone was established and remains largely uninhabited. The disaster led to sweeping reforms in nuclear reactor design, international reporting standards, and emergency preparedness worldwide. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. The Fukushima Daiichi disaster began on March 11, 2011, following a magnitude 9.0 earthquake off the northeastern coast of Japan. The earthquake triggered a tsunami with waves exceeding 15 meters, overwhelming the plant's seawall and flooding emergency generators. With no power, cooling systems failed in 3 reactors, causing fuel rods to overheat and partially melt. Between March 12 and March 15, hydrogen gas accumulated and exploded in reactor buildings, releasing radioactive material. The Japanese government ordered the evacuation of approximately 154,000 people from surrounding areas. While no immediate radiation-related deaths were confirmed, long-term health monitoring continues. Large areas of land and ocean were contaminated, and agricultural production was disrupted. Cleanup and decommissioning efforts are expected to take 30 to 40 years, with total costs exceeding $200 billion. Fukushima exposed weaknesses in disaster planning for extreme natural events and prompted several countries to reassess nuclear energy policies. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The Deepwater Horizon disaster occurred on April 20, 2010, when an offshore drilling rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. The explosion killed 11 workers and caused the rig to sink 2 days later. The blowout preventer failed, allowing oil to flow unchecked from the Macondo well at a depth of approximately 1,500 meters. Over 87 days, an estimated 4.9 million barrels of oil were released, making it the largest marine oil spill in history. Oil contaminated over 1,300 miles of coastline, severely impacting marine ecosystems, fisheries, and tourism. Investigations found that poor cementing practices, inadequate risk assessment, and cost-cutting decisions contributed to the failure. Cleanup involved dispersants, controlled burns, and mechanical recovery. BP paid more than $65 billion in fines, settlements, and cleanup costs. The disaster led to stricter offshore drilling regulations and safety reforms worldwide. The Texas City Disaster. The Texas City disaster occurred on April 16, 1947, when the French cargo ship SS Grand Camp exploded in the port of Texas City, Texas. The ship was carrying approximately 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer. A fire broke out in the cargo hold, and despite attempts to suppress it, the material detonated at 9:12 a.m. The explosion triggered chain reactions at nearby oil refineries and chemical plants. The blast killed at least 581 people, injured over 5,000, and destroyed much of the city's industrial infrastructure. Thousands of buildings were damaged or leveled. The disaster remains one of the deadliest industrial accidents in U.S. history and led to significant changes in hazardous material storage, transport regulations, and disaster response planning. The Beirut ammonium nitrate explosion. The Beirut explosion occurred on August 4, 2020, at the port of Beirut, Lebanon. Approximately 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate had been stored improperly in a warehouse since 2013, following its confiscation from a cargo ship. Despite repeated warnings from customs and port officials, the material remained unsecured. A fire ignited nearby materials, triggering a massive explosion equivalent to several hundred tons of TNT. The blast killed at least 218 people, injured more than 7,000, and displaced around 300,000 residents. Damage extended several kilometers from the port, with economic losses estimated at $10 to $15 billion. The explosion highlighted the dangers of prolonged neglect, poor governance, and lack of accountability in hazardous material management. The Piper Alpha Disaster. The Piper Alpha disaster occurred on July 6, 1988, on an offshore oil production platform located in the North Sea, approximately 190 kilometers northeast of Aberdeen, Scotland. Piper Alpha was operated by Occidental Petroleum and was one of the most productive oil platforms in the region. On the evening of the disaster, routine maintenance was being carried out on a pressure safety valve connected to a gas condensate pump. The valve was removed and temporarily sealed, but this information was not properly communicated during a shift change. At around 9:55 p.m., gas began leaking from the pump system, forming a flammable cloud that ignited and caused a massive explosion. Subsequent explosions followed as gas lines from other platforms continued feeding fuel into the fire. Emergency shutdown systems failed, evacuation routes were blocked, and the platform's design allowed fire to spread rapidly. Of the 226 workers on board, 167 were killed, many due to smoke inhalation or jumping into freezing seas. The disaster led to the Cullen Inquiry, which resulted in sweeping reforms in offshore safety regulations, emergency training, and platform design across the global oil industry. The Seveso Disaster. The Seveso disaster occurred on July 10, 1976, at a chemical manufacturing plant operated by Igmisa near the town of Seveso in northern Italy. The facility produced chemicals used in herbicides and disinfectants. During a production process involving trichlorophenol, a runaway chemical reaction caused temperatures and pressure inside a reactor to rise uncontrollably. A safety valve opened, releasing a toxic cloud containing 2,3,7,8 tetrachlorodibenzo-P-dioxin, TCDD, one of the most dangerous forms of dioxin known. The cloud drifted over several residential areas, contaminating approximately 18 square kilometers of land. Thousands of animals died or were slaughtered to prevent toxins from entering the food chain, and over 700 people were evacuated. While no immediate human deaths were recorded, many residents developed chlorachin, a severe skin condition linked to dioxin exposure, and long-term studies showed increased risks of cancer and reproductive disorders. The disaster prompted the creation of the Seveso Directive by the European Economic Community, which established strict regulations for the handling and storage of hazardous industrial chemicals across Europe.